All right, we are right at 1 o'clock Central Time, so we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar, Physical Records Management for the Mad World of Life Sciences. We appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today, and the first thing we like to do is just take a second to introduce today's speaker. My name is Shana Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal, and I will be the host of the webinar today. And I am joined by our key speaker, Gimmal Solutions Architect, Tim Butler. And before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen. And we're going to answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you will see pop up in a separate window. So please keep an eye out for that. Your participation is appreciated and all answers are anonymous. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat so we can assist you. Now to kick things off, I have just a couple slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. So Gimmal is an information governance software company, and it was founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that help balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We work with our client success team and global network of partners to deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. On the screen, you can see Gimmal's family of information government solutions. They work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration from legacy systems, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, and document management for SAP content. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over to Tim so he can get started with today's presentation.
All right, thanks, Shana. Appreciate that. And guys, just as a quick backdrop, we got a lot of information going to try to squeeze in, so I'm going to go at a pretty rapid pace here today. But as Shana mentioned, we're grateful for you being here, spending a few minutes out of your busy day with us. And if you do have feedback, positive or negative, we're very eager to hear that from you, either in the chat itself or via a couple of the email addresses you will see on the screen at the end of the presentation. Now, guys, a quick analogy here. Recently, I had trouble sleeping one night, and I was on YouTube looking at videos, and I saw one that caught my attention and said, "How to survive," and this was the actual title of the video. It said, "How to survive a tsunami according to science." And it was the according to science part that really caught my attention. I said, well, I want to know that, right? And to save you 10 minutes of your life, guys, here's what the video boiled down to. Number one, it said, know the signs, right? Pacific Ocean, 85% of tsunamis happen in the Pacific. So if you're out there, be aware. Number two, if you just felt an earthquake, red alert, right? There's a chance of a tsunami. The chances have just been heightened. And then, of course, that kind of somewhat famous one, if you happen to be at the beach and you see the ocean water receding, by all means, do not go down and investigate and be curious. Rather, get out of Dodge, right? Those are the signs of an impending tsunami. The second half of the video really kind of focused on, okay, so if this is happening to you, what do you do? And here, you can see on the screen, here's what they suggested. Number one, get 2 miles inland. Well, if you don't have 2 miles inland that you can get to quickly. Number two was get to a higher ground with an elevation of at least 100 feet. Awesome, but you don't always have that. Number three, find a building with a sure foundation and get to an upper level. And then the one that really made me chuckle a little bit was, okay, if all of this happens and all these other execution plans fail, the last resort is find something and hold on to it tight. So I chuckled, right? And I wanted to use that, guys, as an intro today because, metaphorically speaking, at least within the life sciences world itself, there's that metaphorical business tsunami known as a merger, an acquisition, or a divestiture. And I'm hoping today, guys, that as a result of this webinar, that your strategy will not be that last bullet point there, that when it happens, I'll just hold on to something tight. Rather, I'm hoping you'll be a little better prepared to face this event. that's in front of us. Now, guys, we did ourselves a little bit of disservice, I'll just say, in the title, right? The title of our webinar today was Physical Records Management for the Mad World of Life Sciences. And of course, MAD being the acronym for those mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. But where we did the disservice, guys, is first of all, it's really not just life sciences, of course. Now, I think it is life sciences in particular, but in addition, there's other verticals, especially oil and gas, financial services, healthcare, if you happen to be in one of those verticals. And really, it affects every vertical out there, including the public sector. So what we are going to do here is focus on some principles that apply across the board. We will spend a couple minutes in the middle of the webinar here talking about physical records in particular, but really the principles apply across the board. And then also, guys, the disservice was in terms, it's really not just true of physical records. What we're going to look at here today is equally applicable, not only to physical records, but to their digital records as well. Now, before we get in, guys, to the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the webinar, we would like to ask you a couple poll questions, or just one question here. You can see the question on the board there right now, guys. How many times have you been employed by an organization while they were undergoing a merger, acquisition, or divestiture? Not really asking here, guys, that that organization was a part of one, but they were a part of one while you were working there. So if you would take just a moment and give us your answer in one of those selections there, we would be grateful for that.
And we are actually going to show the results of this poll so you guys can get a good understanding of your peers on this call. Again, they'll will be anonymous to others, but we appreciate your participation.
All right, and there comes our tabulation back. So 0, 1, number 2, and greater than 2. And yeah, guys, assuming that most of our audience today has something to do with life sciences or one of the industries I just put up, not surprised here at all. For those of you in category 0, that 14% of you, just appreciate you're lucky, because that is not always the case, guys. And in fact, probably will not be the case moving into the future. So thank you for spending just a moment to give us the indication there. Now, I want to give you one quick backdrop here, guys. Just a couple of bullet points, some facts and figures before we jump into strategies. What can you do to prepare yourself for these impending tsunamis? At the top here, 2022. So Deloitte recently released a survey. They actually did the research in Q3 of 2021. And I think the actual poll numbers, I think the pool, so to speak, was about 1,300 respondents. But here's where the numbers came out. 57% of corporate respondents engaged in a divestiture in the past 12 months. So more than half had been a part of this experience. 92% expect the deal volume, and by deal volume, what they meant here is mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, those types of events, they expected them to increase or at a minimum stay the same. They expect a lot of activity in this area. And then 44% of respondents said that where they're working right now, they are considering one of those three, at least one of those three, within the next 12 months. So guys, this stuff is happening all over the place. You know, I've asked myself, why is this so? I'll have to be man enough to admit I don't know for sure, but a couple of major factors, right? The global economy is just changing rapidly before our eyes. Communications, companies are interacting more and more with each other. There's just much more synergy in the global market than there used to be, resulting in one of these mad forms, if you will. Secondly, I'm sure the whole COVID pandemic has accelerated this process, right? It's just changed our lives in a number of ways. It probably has affected the activity levels here as well. Second bullet point, I actually, guys, was significantly shocked by this. I went back and kind of just combed through some Gimmal data here, and here's what I found. This is based upon dozens and dozens and dozens of clients within the life sciences sector. And I had to double check because I just couldn't believe it the first time through. But what I found is of those clients, now this is specific just to Gimmal Physical for the moment here, but almost, in fact, I could not verify a couple, but it looked like 100%, and I mean 100% of our life science clients had experienced a merger, an acquisition, or a divestiture. There was really almost no exceptions. Now, to be fair and to balance the data a little bit, For a handful of those, these activities, these mad, so to speak, activities had happened more than a decade ago. So it was a little bit old, but that was the exception. Most of them within the last decade. And in fact, a large chunk of the data indicated within the last 2 years that these clients of Gimmal had undergone either a merger, an acquisition, or a divestiture. So really, guys, that sort of proverb, if you will, at the bottom of this slide here, it really seems to be true in this case. This is really not a matter of if, but rather when. Especially in life sciences, you're going to experience one of these sometime in the relatively near future. So guys, I want to kind of get to, all right, with that backdrop, hopefully I've convinced you that there is some degree of risk, danger, if you will, involved here. How do you prepare for that? How do you get ready for this activity coming down the pike that will affect you, especially if you are in the records management sector within your particular organization? It will affect you in a pretty major way. What can you do? How can you prepare yourself? And guys, here's what I came up with. Really, I want to focus on 3 elements, and you can see those on the right-hand side of the slide. Information architecture. We'll spend just a few moments there talking about knowing your data, and then as a follow-up, cleansing your data, super important. Secondly, we'll move to process documentation. For those of you within the life sciences sector, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys are all about documentation, and you're head and shoulders, generally speaking, above the other industries in that area. But we'll focus there as well. And then finally, number 3, what kind of software tools should you have or should you be procuring so that you can leverage the benefits and features of those tools to help you through these experiences that come along. So with that, let's jump into those 3 pillars, if you will, starting with information architecture. Now, guys, on the slide here at the leftmost, what you're seeing here, and it's going to sound so basic, but I want to emphasize this point. Know what you have. Now, we're talking right now, guys, in terms of information architecture, your data, the actual data repositories you have. Now, a number of you would probably say, well, Tim, I know what I have, and I believe you do. But I will tell you, having been doing this for more than 2 decades now, more times than I can believe, we've begun to implement a new client who was not even aware of all the databases they had. One quick example, just relatively recently, had a customer coming on to Gimmal Physical, tracking boxes, tracking files. They also wanted to track microfilm. They'd been around for a while. They had data on microfilm. As we began to inventory their data repositories, they admitted to us, hey, you know what, Tim? We had an entire database about microfilm we just didn't even know we had. So it doesn't happen all the time, but please make sure you've got an inventory of where your data resides, especially the data that concerns records for the context of our conversation today. The next 3 guys kind of all go together, really, but once you've identified the data repositories you have, make sure you know these things, right? Know exactly where they are within the organization. Are they in the cloud? Are they out on file shares? Are they on dedicated servers? What have you? Know who owns or manages that data. Usually it's your IT, not always. Sometimes it's heads of departments or what have you. And then know who's using it or has access to it, who can provide business insight into that data. Guys, in the end, and we'll move forward in just a moment, but in the end, when it comes to the mergers and the acquisitions and the divestitures, a huge portion of that activity really surrounds the bulk movement of large chunks of data. And so all these elements here are crucial that you have these in place before you begin that process of the migration. Finally, on the right-hand side there, guys, reduce the number of data repositories. This is a tall order. I appreciate that, but wherever possible, limit what you have, bring those together, condense them, get rid of some. The fewer you have, the easier your process will be when you undergo one of those mad processes. And at the bottom, guys, really just sort of a question to ask yourself that I hope you will find helpful. If tomorrow your boss told you that you had to deliver all of your data to someone, do you know how to set that process in motion? Do you know the right people to talk to, the right personnel, the right resources to get the ball rolling so that you can deliver when it is necessary? So still under pillar number 1, knowing your data, information architecture. Second part of that is cleansing your data, right, guys? Briefly mentioned this earlier, but let's just dig a little bit deeper. How dirty is it? I will tell you that most of our clients, when we're onboarding into a Gimmal solution, they will tend to say, yeah, our data is pretty good. And sometimes they're right. Sometimes they are not right. Guys, in the analogy, and forgive me if you've heard me say this before, the analogy I like to use, if I were to ask you the question, is your kitchen clean? I think, and I hope all of you would say, well, of course my kitchen is clean. Why wouldn't it be clean? Well, if I were to come to your house and actually walk in and move the refrigerator and look underneath, would you still answer that with yes, my kitchen is clean? I know it's not the case here, right? It's amazing what accumulates under that refrigerator, right? So same thing with your data, right? It may look really clean, but once you actually dig in and start moving stuff around, you're going to find all kinds of things there that you just weren't aware of. Again, right, these mad activities involve the movement of large chunks of data. If they are not clean, it makes your job all that much more difficult. Now, specifically, kind of bullet number 2 on this slide here, what can you do to sort of just inventory or investigate how clean is my data? Here's some real practical things, guys. Number 1, if you have the capability or in conjunction with your IT, query or run reports on your data repositories now that indicate how extensive is my duplicate record problem. Secondly, do I have orphaned records? And for those of you not familiar, what I'm really talking about there, let me give you an example. Again, if we're focused on physical records, if you've got a data set describing, let's say, file folder level data, and as part of that data set, it indicates in its metadata that, hey, I actually reside inside of a box, let's say box 123. And then I go look at your box data set, and lo and behold, there is no box 123. That is an example of an orphaned record. I've got a child record, a file whose parent is the box, but the parent cannot be found. This can be a major obstacle for you when you're beginning to merge or divest or acquire other data and blend those into one. These records that have lost their relationship, taken together, it's known as relational integrity within the industry. And then finally, guys, a real common issue here, misaligned data types as much as possible. See what you've got there. Do you have a date field, for example, that's full of text instead of dates? Check on those kind of things. Again, guys, I know this is a pretty tall order, but where possible, you can certainly wait till the very end, right? And then try to fix this all at the end, but why not begin now, cleanse now, do not wait. Second pillar, the process documentation. As I mentioned up front, guys, for those of you in life sciences, you're probably already all over this. I wanted to spend just a moment just kind of digesting some of this, reflecting upon it from the perspective of records management in the context of MAD. So document, document, document. Are your SOPs up to date? Just general stuff here, guys. You know this stuff, just reminders here. But that next bullet down, that third one, is your corporate retention schedule up to date? Super important, guys, especially from the records management perspective. And by this, I don't mean, is it up to date somewhere within your organization? What I really mean, is it up to date and accurate in the context of the data repositories you have now? Is that accurate information? Right below that, and to dig into a little bit more detail, when it comes to the processes surrounding records management, is the process surrounding records declaration, is that sufficiently described? That is it known? Is it documented in your organization? When it is that a piece of content has reached a sufficient piece of maturity that it needs to be declared, locked, if you will, as a record. Secondly, as that record begins to move through its life cycle, is the records classification process sufficiently defined? Do you have discrete buckets so that records will wind up in the appropriate bucket or in the appropriate file plan or in the appropriate record class? Whatever verbiage you use there, is that documented? And then, of course, fast forwarding to the end of life itself, when it comes time to disposition those records and taken as a process as a whole, is that process known and documented by what I consider to be the 3 players of the records disposition process: the records management team, the records owners themselves, and the records custodians. In other words, guys, if all the players in those 3 categories there were to leave the company and a new crew came in, would your process documentation, especially surrounding records disposition, would it be sufficient to help them through that process. So pillar number 2, process documentation. And then finally, pillar number 3, guys, in our webinar here today, do you have sufficient quality software tools at your disposal to really help you through this difficult process? Real quickly here, guys, just 5 points, 5 takeaways. My perspective, my opinion here, numbers 3 and 4, which we'll get to in just a moment, may be the best takeaways in this whole webinar when it comes to preparing yourself for the merger, acquisition, or divestiture. So key features in software, guys. Number 1, guys, if all possible, cloud, move your software tools to the cloud, the tool and the data repository itself. Another topic for another webinar at some other point in time. So many advantages to doing this. I'm going to ask you to trust me right now. Move to the cloud if at all possible. Secondly, decentralize. This also could be a webinar in and of itself and the benefits of doing that. Experience has indicated for me, especially surrounding physical records management, that the records management team has done way too much of the work. I encourage you to decentralize. It will actually help you as part of this process, this impending tsunami, so to speak. If you're gonna, though, if I can convince you, here's some important points to remember. Keep the interface of your software tools simple, right? If you're gonna roll it out to the masses, if it's not easy for them to use, they're not going to use it. Secondly, and going in tandem with that, it has to have a very configurable access, especially in terms of security concerns. If you're rolling it out to the masses, you need to keep certain people from seeing certain things and others from doing certain things. And then, of course, guys, ease of data input. Make sure you're kind of investigating that, evaluating that. Is it going to be intuitive for people to get the data in? And then on the back end of that, of course, once the data is in, we've got to be able to get that data out. So what I mentioned just a minute ago here, guys, 3 and 4. In the end, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, along with all the other things that go along with a merger, an acquisition, or a divestiture, all of the legal issues and all of the logistical issues and the real world activities that go on, in the end, from a records management perspective, largely what we're talking about is the movement of lots of data. What is sometimes known as the extraction, the transformation, and the loading of data, going by the abbreviation ETL. Does your software that you have now, or the software you're considering to procure in the near future, does it have bulk modification features? You will need this. When you're going to condense, if you're going to merge large data sets, it's not going to line up. Somewhere there needs to be bulk capabilities to change data to make it unified in a new repository. Number 4, stateful data capabilities. I won't try to define this one for you guys, but I'll use a quick example. Let's take the example of as you merge one data set, records management data set that is, with another records management data set. In all likelihood, they each had their own set of rules, their own classification rules, their own record classes. Well, very often the case, and this is what we've seen with our pharmaceutical clients in particular over the years, they need to bring over those record class rules and those classifications into the new unified repository because the records need to still point to them. But what they don't want to do is allow people to use those legacy classifications day forward. So it's sort of a, so to speak, if you will, that they put those older legacy record class codes into a read-only state. That's the stateful capability, whereas the new unified plan has full capabilities moving forward. So one quick example there. I hope that made sense to you. And then finally here, number 5, in terms of key features in software, I'll make sure you can get data out of it, right? Whatever the format happens to be, you got to be able to move lots of data around. You got to have that as a key feature. Which brings us, guys, to our second poll question here, specific to records management within your organization. Which of the following do you believe to be the most need of improvement? Is it related to data, the quality of your data? Is it related to the quality of the documentation itself? Or are you having issues with the software tools at your disposal? Again, would appreciate you taking just a minute to choose one of those for us. Giving marketing a second here to tabulate the results on this one and see what we come up with. And they're pretty even spread there. All right, thanks guys. Appreciate you taking just a moment to do that for us. And in conclusion, guys, so regardless of where you end up, right, whether you're blending your data with others, a merger, ingesting another's data, acquisition, providing your data to another, divestiture, get your house in order. Guys, you know, in the end, which side of this little slide here are you on? Because I've been on both sides, right? You're going to have this issue at some time in the future. You can choose not to prepare at all. It's logical, it's legitimate, but it's probably not very wise, right? Or as best you are able, prepare for that eventual challenging event. So with that, guys, appreciate your time here. I'm going to turn things back over to Shayna in marketing to close us out. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Tim. We have another poll question here. Tim talked a little bit about tools to solve these issues that you guys are facing. If you'd like more information on Gimmal Physical, which is our physical records management tool, or a demonstration, go ahead and click yes on your screen. But I do want to remind everybody if you have a question, go ahead and submit it in the Q&A right now. And then we will, to be respectful of time, we have a couple of minutes. I have a couple of questions here that we can get started on. So Tim, the first one, what happens if the data is not clean? For example, does it just get moved over with acquisition activities?
Yeah, great question. It's called the old lift and shift, right? So guys, it really concerns what's known as your information architecture. And the basic principle is this: tackle a problem as far upstream as you possibly can. So that means if you can, clean your data now, but it's the real world, right? And you're not always able to do that. And so as Shayna just indicated, as your question sort of indicated as well, sometimes you have to lift and shift it the way it is. That's where those two bullet points, number 3 and 4, came into on the one slide, that we understand sometimes you lift it, get it into the new tool, and then once it's there, use the bulk modification features to get it into the proper condition, as well as those stateful record conditions, so you can keep the legacy data around. In other words, guys, if it's possible, clean it ahead of time, but you don't always have to. There are other ways to skin that cat.
Great. And then the next one here and the last one, if I don't see any more come in, you mentioned corporate retention schedules. How often do you recommend reviewing these retention schedules?
Every day. No, guys, that's a hard question. It really depends upon the level of change within your organization. When it comes to the MAD activities, oh man, yeah, review them now and again up until the point that event actually happens. The cleaner those things are, the better your life is going to be as you go through, which is admittedly a very challenging process.
Great. Well, if you guys can think of any more questions, Tim's email address is right there up on the screen, as well as my own. If you would like more resources on the topic, if we go on to the next screen, you can always email us at info@gimmal.com. Visit our website, www.gimmal.com. If you would like the recording of this webinar, maybe you came a little bit late or you'd like to send it to a peer of yours, we will be sending those out in the form of a thank you email between 24 and 48 hours. And then we hope to see everybody on our webinar next week, titled Information Governance Lessons Learned from 2021. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.